From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. Our top story tonight is about climate change. President Joe Biden said the United States is blinking code red as a nation, referring to the impact of climate change and extreme weather events. He was speaking during a visit to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado yesterday. President Biden said extreme weather cost America $99 billion last year. He added that it could cost well over $100 billion this year. The president is calling for investment to tackle the issue.
Extreme weather, we're seeing, is only going to come more frequently and with more ferocity. And we're blinking code red as a nation, and we really are.
In related news, Greenpeace environmental activists climbed the Dutch Parliament's building, calling on officials to tackle the climate crisis.
Ja, wij zijn dus op het dak geklommen, we hebben spandoeken uitgerold. We vragen nu nog 1 keer aan de Tweede Kamer om de komende week rondom Prinsjesdag het probleem echt serieus te nemen, met maatregelen te komen. En als ze dat niet doen, dan stappen we naar de rechter en dan gaan we de rechter vragen om de Nederlandse overheid op de vingers te tikken en het gewoon te verbieden.
Emily Claire Hari has been sentenced to 53 years in prison for the 2017 bombing of the Dar al-Farouk Islamic Center in Bloomington, Minnesota. The U.S. Justice Department announced the verdict on Monday. This may be the highest number of years anyone has been sentenced for terrorism against Muslims in the United States. Hari, who was charged, tried, and convicted under the name Michael Hari, is now a transgender woman. U.S. District Judge Donovan Frank said the evidence clearly showed Hari's intent was to scare, intimidate, and terrorize Muslims. Hari established the White Rabbits militia group in Clarence, Illinois. The group published a manifesto seeking a return to America of the good old days. Hari's co-defendants, Michael McWhorter and Joe Morris, pleaded guilty for their roles in the Minnesota Islamic Center bombing, according to the Justice Department. Their sentencing hearings have not been scheduled. 8 days after the 2020 election, then-President Donald Trump secretly signed a memo to withdraw all troops from Afghanistan by January 15th this year. This is because Trump was so determined to end the war during his presidency. That's according to a new book by journalists Bob Woodward and Robert Costa entitled Peril. It reveals that the November 11th memo was secretly drafted by 2 Trump loyalists. The Defense Secretary, National Security Advisor, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff never saw the memo. It also did not go through the normal process for a military directive, the authors wrote. In addition, the memo authorized withdrawal of U.S. troops from Somalia no later than December 31st last year. A U.S. State Department investigation is underway on whether an American drone strike in Afghanistan killed an aid worker instead of an ISIS militant. This was revealed by Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He was giving testimony on the U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The investigation is looking into an American Reaper drone delivering the strike that hit a car in the capital, Kabul. The Pentagon said this disrupted a plot by ISIS to attack Kabul International Airport, where evacuations of Americans and their Afghan allies were taking place. But 10 members of a family, including a worker for a U.S.-based aid group, were killed, according to the AFP. A New York Times investigation found the worker, Esmarai Ahmadi, had been moving water canisters, which possibly raised suspicions. The Pentagon is assessing civilian casualties from the strike, but maintains its claim that it disrupted an imminent attack. Overall, estimates of the death toll in the 20-year war on terror range from 900,000 to 2 million, according to Brown University and Physicians for Social Responsibility. As Canada's federal election enters its final week, issues such as racism and anti-Muslim hate have taken a backseat. This comes just months after politicians took to a London, Ontario stage to denounce hate. This was after a white supremacist killed 4 members of a Canadian Muslim family in the city on June 6th. The tragedy led to an outpouring of support for the Muslim community. It also created a sense of unity stemming from unprecedented challenges in Canada over the past year. This includes a national racial reckoning sparked by the murder of George Floyd by a Minnesota police officer, the discovery of hundreds of unmarked children's graves at former Indigenous residential schools, as well as an uptick in anti-Asian hate amid an unrelenting pandemic. Farid Khan is founder of Canadians United Against Hate. He told CBC News this week that these issues cannot be put on the back burner. A National Council of Canadian Muslims report showed that more Muslims have been killed in targeted hate attacks in Canada than in any other G7 country in the past 5 years. Haiti's top prosecutor is seeking charges against Prime Minister Ariel Henry. This is following his alleged involvement in the assassination of former Haitian President Jovenel Moïse. Prosecutor Bedford Claude also issued an order on Tuesday banning Henry from leaving Haiti. Henry was summoned to testify after investigators confirmed a series of phone calls between him and Joseph Félix Badian. Badian is one of three main suspects in the assassination. He is also a former Haitian Justice Ministry official believed to be on the run. The Prime Minister has denied the accusations. The 53-year-old Moïse was assassinated on July 7th by armed commandos at his home in the capital, Port-au-Prince. Authorities have detained 26 suspects. They include 3 police officers and 18 former Colombian soldiers involved in the assassination. Supporters of the Hindutva nationalist ideology threatened to kill, rape, and harm scholars associated with a Zoom-based event last weekend. More than 1 million hate mail messages were sent to the organizers, speakers, and participants of the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference. The event was co-sponsored by departments and centers of more than 53 universities, most of them in the U.S. They included Harvard, Stanford, and Princeton. The conference discussed various issues relating to Hindutva, a Hindu supremacist ideology, in India and in other parts of the world. Over 900 scholars and 50 global academic institutions took a stand in support of the conference when it faced threats before taking place. A trailblazing former Muslim fashion model has criticized the desperate fashion world and says she always felt like an outsider. Halima Aden said she felt like one of the biggest tokens in the fashion industry. The Somali-American modest fashion model quit last November. Aden's career is marked by many firsts in the field. In 2017, she was the first model to wear a hijab on the cover of the U.S. magazine Allure. She was also the first to wear a head covering on the cover of British Vogue magazine a year later. And in 2019, she was the first to wear a burkini on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Now, Aden says she felt she had to compromise her beliefs as a Muslim to fit into the industry. Aden has returned to the fashion industry, but now as a designer. She signed a 2-year contract with the Muslim fashion company Modanisa. She said the e-commerce modest fashion business shares her faith and values and fully respects her choices as a Muslim woman. An activist who has documented the plight of Muslim minorities in China's Xinjiang region has been barred from entering neighboring Kazakhstan. Jean Boonen is the founder of the Xinjiang Victims Database. It contains entries for nearly 25,000 people imprisoned, detained, or unaccounted for in Xinjiang by the Chinese government. The United States says Beijing is carrying out a genocide against Uyghurs and other mostly Muslim Turkic people in Xinjiang. Experts estimate that more than 1 million people are incarcerated in camps and jails in the region. Thousands of Kazakhs have family ties to Xinjiang. They are also the second largest Turkic group after the Uyghurs. The potential nomination of Tel Aviv District Court Judge Khalid Ghaboub to the Israeli Supreme Court could make history, Israeli newspaper Haaretz reports. Ghaboub is the district court's deputy president and head of its economic division. He is a leading candidate for the Supreme Court appointment. About 21% of Israel's population are Arab Muslims. Since Israel's establishment, no Muslim has received a permanent appointment as a justice on the Supreme Court. Human Rights Watch, an Israeli human rights organization, B'Tselem, declared Israel an apartheid state earlier this year. This is for its discriminatory treatment of Palestinians. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. On Muslim News, we have covered the mental health issues of racial minorities in general and of Muslims in particular. Let's watch.
Thank you once again, Henna. Today, we're very happy to be joined by Dr. Abida Minhas, who is a licensed professional counselor based out of Dallas, Texas. Thank you so much for being here with us, Dr. Abida.
Thank you so much for having me on, Salia.
Our pleasure. I wanted to first start off by quoting something that we had noticed at the American Psychiatric Association about racial and ethnic minorities often suffering a little bit more from poor mental health outcomes. If you could talk to us about the different factors that might be disproportionately affecting such minorities, including what is standing in the way of fulfilling their mental health needs.
Sure. Thank you once again for having me on. One of the things that's disproportionate about the racial minorities and mental health is, unfortunately, the stigma that's in our communities about mental health. And often due to the stigma, how people from marginalized communities or communities from minority backgrounds don't often seek mental health. So in this country, for example, in America, we have 43 million people that suffer from mental health illnesses. However, out of those 43 million, we may have a very small fraction that are from marginalized or small communities of color and ethnic communities that often seek out help for those issues.
You brought me to my next question. When we hear about the idea of cultural stigma surrounding mental health care, so even though, for example, recently there have been a lot of awareness campaigns surrounding mental health in general, in 2021, in your professional opinion, do you feel as though we still need to normalize the idea of mental health help and mental health resources for such racialized minority and ethnic minority communities in North America?
Yes, absolutely we do. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have from racial communities or people of color or ethnic backgrounds, often the stigma of not seeking out help often keeps them in the loop of their mental health or mental illnesses. So often what we have to do is educate people about the need of seeking help. You know, often people go in isolation or in their depression or anxiety for long periods of time because they don't want to seek out the help because of the shame, the guilt. Sometimes it's monetary factors. Sometimes it's not knowing if I could seek out help and get the benefit that I need from it. That the shame and guilt is profound because often people get labeled for having a mental health diagnosis. And another reason why mental health is stigmatized in our societies, but community-wise, that wide is what we see that contributing to that conflict even more so. So educating our communities is so important.
Now, I wanted to delve a little bit deeper into a specific pocket within racialized and ethnic minorities, which is the North American Muslim population. For example, we saw a recent news report from Northwestern University student newspaper that actually revealed the lack of availability of Muslim mental health professionals and how that was affecting certain students on campus. If you could please talk to us about these kinds of disparities in terms of culturally competent, maybe faith-based help, and how that might or might not contribute to the mental health outcome of minority and diverse peoples from faith-based backgrounds, perhaps.
Sure, thank you. That's such a good question, Salia. I think how it impacts people is that, you know, as you're in your last really great question you asked about what is that keeps people from even going for mental health or mental health interventions. Add to that the cultural and racial stigma of mental health. You've got, a double compound effect of people not wanting to seek out help. And then the judgment piece of it. Oftentimes mental health is something where if people are being judged by their own inner circles, they're less likely to seek help. But on top of that, what you have is the disparity causes people to not want to connect with people that doesn't look like them, that doesn't relate to them, that may even judge them on top of their experiences that they're having. For example, if you talk about growing up in in a marginalized community, coming from a South Asian or Asian background, or a culture that doesn't accept the person you're speaking to, and there's a stigma that they may not understand them, you may not get that authentic experience of somebody getting the mental health and psychological help that they need. And it is very important that they connect with people that looks like them, that empathizes with them, that understands the experience that they come from. And empathy is a human experience. It's a human feeling. So anybody coming from a different culture can understand, but that understanding and lack of not feeling judged is very, very important in a clinical therapeutic setting.
Thank you so much for that. I wanted to get into this idea of stigmatization and judgment. We found that sometimes, and I'm just using this as an example, but faith-based experiences sometimes might have people using spirituality or religion to perhaps maybe invalidate the mental health struggles of people. For example, saying that their mental struggles might be because of either not praying enough or not having enough faith, for example. If you could just talk to us about the idea of perhaps differentiating spirituality to heal between actually taking that crucial step to step forward and search for culturally appropriate mental health services, perhaps the differences between the two and why getting real help might matter and might make a difference for some people.
Yes, I think such a great point that you're bringing up, Salia, because often you're right. I mean, I think for all of us as practitioners or people that come from marginalized community, faith is very important to us. It's very much part of our healing even, but the example that I often use and it's not to minimize that faith has such a profound and huge factor in healing. But just like you won't heal your diabetes away, just like you don't pray for your, if God forbid somebody was diagnosed with cancer, you don't pray for those things to go away. You pray for peace. You pray for comfort. So, mental health is the same way. If somebody is going through depression and anxiety, and even a severe mental illness, often you need interventions like medication. You need interventions like therapy or psychological assessments to be able to figure out what is the root cause of some of these issues. So spirituality is actually inclusive. It gives us another framework to be able to help people as a factor to the many compositions of what it needs to be able to heal people for their mental health issues. Mental health itself is so complex that we need complex interventions to help. So our faith and our passion with our spirituality is just a factor in that. So it's not to just say, if you're depressed, pray it away. Yes, it can definitely help, Salia, but it's not the only intervention that we need at times. Some people may need more. They may need therapy regularly, weekly, sometimes twice a week. I sometimes see people that are severely depressed twice or 3 times a week. Or we make sure that they're taking their medications regularly, checking in with their doctor. So because mental health is a multifaceted, complex disease, we also have multi-factors that can help heal a person as well.
Thank you so much for that. I couldn't help but notice that you're joining us from your practice over there in Dallas, Texas, and it would be I'd be remiss not to perhaps ask you about your experiences when dealing with different patients now versus maybe just 1 year ago, especially with COVID-19 and isolation. How has that perhaps changed the way that young people are coming in or perhaps not coming in? In other words, what are the different trends that you're seeing affecting everybody, perhaps not just from youth populations, but from young adults to senior populations out there? And what kind of resources might be needed at this time to further help them as we come out of this situation on a global scale, of course?
Oh, thank you. Yes, of course. The trend that I'm seeing, Salia, is that people are seeking out help more. The one thing I see is that people, because many of us have been socially isolated, that because we have not been able to interact with people we love and care about, there is a difference in the way that people are reaching out to a mental health professional like myself. So often what we're seeing is a trend is going up, that people are seeking help. And a lot of it is because many people that were struggling for many years, with issues or living in a situation that was unhealthy for them, or they needed to make a change, now that they're in that maybe living with that situation face on or head on, a lot of people are encouraged to seek out that help. Unfortunately, the other trend that we're seeing as well is people who have been struggling that haven't had a place to go to are even more isolated. So, we're seeing a positive trend where people are seeking out help, but then we're also seeing people that unfortunately may be in unhealthy relationships now are attached to those unhealthy relationships more long term, or domestic violence issues are on the rise because now people are unfortunately living with their perpetrator in the same home. Due to that, often people then are seeking out help. So both trends are in itself can be helpful, but unfortunately, I would still say that because we are not getting the people that need help, that we keep doing things that you're doing today, which is educating people, to be able to know that there is help out there. Yes, maybe coming from marginalized communities, our voices aren't as high as people that come from the majority communities, but there is help out there. I myself have started a network of mental health therapists in the local Dallas community, where we go out and do interventions and talks and education for the community, psychoeducation, and encouraging people to often get help. So I think what you're doing today is profoundly effective, Salia, because you can educate people and communities to let go of the guilt and shame of mental health and seek it out if people need help.
Of course. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Minhas. I wanted to just touch upon, state by state, province by province, it looks like communities such as the North American community are all kind of doing their own thing to help each other, whether it be their youth or certain different demographic populations of those specific communities. Perhaps in your area, or perhaps what you might have noticed, what do you think the Muslim community is doing right now to help each other in terms of providing the different kinds of psycho or mental health help that's needed by this specific racially ethnic minority, religious minority community, which would be North American Muslims?
Well, myself, the network that I've created, we're called MAPS, so we're Muslim Association for Psychological Services. And so I myself, being one of the founders, often what we've done is we've tried to include a lot of our mosques, and a lot of our religious leaders to be able to be part of mental health dialogues. As you asked previously, is, can people pray and get better from praying and pray essentially their mental health away, or get better in their mental health? Yes, of course they can. They can definitely get better if they have the right factors that help them. So prayer is definitely a very powerful factor that people have as a tool. But we also need to educate the religious leaders and to be able to educate, once again, the community to be able to know that that's one factor, a very multifaceted disease. So to be able to seek out the guidance from other people, collaborations, I often find that helpful collaborations really help to people to align different experts from different fields, professionals like myself, leaders that are community leaders like the imams in the community, the clergy in the community, the teachers in the community, the parents in the community, to be able to come together to be able to help those that are needing help from us. So education definitely helps.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And also that's great how you're going into the different initiatives and projects that you're both a part of and that you actually helped found as well. I would also love to be advantageous and just ask you about the idea of available resources and any kind of push or encouragement that you might be able to give to really anybody out there watching who might feel like they might need a little bit of assistance with their mental health, but depending on what they're going through. How can people reach out? Where can they reach out to? And just listening to a mental health care provider, what would you say to people in terms of giving them that motivation to reach out to get some help?
Sure. I think that even though we live in a community and age of technology, because of that stigma, Salia, as we're talking about, that people still don't seek out help, but I encourage people to do. There's hotlines people can reach out, such as places like NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, people like that do a lot of work like the Khalil Center in Chicago, or Muslim Mental Health, or networks like myself, like MAPS, and all those things are searchable on the internet. So us being MAPS, the Muslim Association for Psychological Services, we have about 30 therapists in our community that serve not only in our Dallas-Fort Worth area, but also in our state of Texas, and HIPAA, because we are able to have sessions outside of our states as well. We can reach out to other places as well. And then we have national hotlines, and in fact, if you have and know somebody that may be suffering or may have had any thoughts of hurting themselves or anyone else, encouraging them to reach out to suicide hotline, to be able to then, if there's nobody else, to be able to connect them with community resources in their areas, somebody they trust, like a friend or family member or a teacher, all those people that you trust can be such a big source and big resource for you. But many times we have, again, NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness, or Khalil Center, MAPS, suicide hotlines, to be able to look at programs where people can reach out and have a hotline or somebody to connect to before they can get to a professional.
I really appreciate your time today, Dr. Abda Minhas, who is a licensed professional counselor based out of Dallas, Texas. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing, Salia. This can definitely help impact and change many lives, so I thank you, and I encourage you to keep doing this work, because there's many people that need it and suffer silently, so I thank you for this time.
Our pleasure.
Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
I am what hunger looks like in America. I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school, because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September.
I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table.
I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. In our previous shows, we covered the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan and the UN's appeal to address the issue. To discuss the current situation of drought and the food crisis in Afghanistan, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid.
Thank you, Samana. Everyone is talking about Afghanistan is facing a major crisis. 18 million people need urgent food. What happened? Within a month of America living and Taliban taking over, situation has become worse. We have someone who studies these things. Ollie Brown, welcome to Muslim Network.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be with you.
Ollie Brown is a fellow with the London-based think tank Chatham House. Why within a month of US exit and Taliban taking over, suddenly it's a major news, there's a food crisis? Why didn't you hear about it 2 months ago or 3 months ago?
So the food crisis has been developing for many months now, and it was being talked about before the takeover of the Taliban government. I mean, for 43 years now, Afghanistan has been suffering from conflict after conflict, and that has devastated Afghanistan, the prospects of Afghans in many, many different ways. And so the latest events in Afghanistan that are obviously hitting the headlines now have compounded a situation that has been developing in Afghanistan for many years. And, you know, most recently, Afghanistan has suffered another drought, the second in 4 years, that has had major impacts on the ability of Afghans to grow food, and to survive. And so it's exacerbating a food crisis, but that food crisis has been brought about also by conflict, by the COVID-19 pandemic that has been affecting all of our lives as well. And so this is the result of many different aspects that have been difficult in Afghanistan for several years now.
So what is the drought situation? I mean, you're saying it is the second in 4 years. Is that the cycle Afghanistan gets, a drought?
So it's not necessarily the cycle that Afghanistan gets. It's the cycle that we might expect in future as the climate continues to change. At the moment, Afghanistan is facing a very severe drought. Roughly half the rain, as expected, fell last year. Afghanistan is a country that relies to a great degree on either livestock, so rain-fed pasture, where the grass that feeds the livestock relies on rain, or on rain-fed crops. There's relatively little irrigation infrastructure, and so the rain that falls determines how much either wheat farmers can grow, how many crops farmers can grow, or what livestock can survive on the land. So the drought that's been affecting Afghanistan has affected many of the different provinces. Roughly a third of the provinces are seriously affected. 4 years ago, there was a drought that was affecting actually 2/3 of the provinces. And so this is a sort of cycle that, I guess, as the climate changes, we might expect to happen more frequently. But that just has a big impact on the ability of Afghanistan to feed itself, to grow crops, for people to survive in rural areas. And that is one more challenge that Afghanistan is facing, in addition to conflict, the changes we've seen politically, and also the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
So Afghanistan, you're saying, essentially is dependent on rain, whether it's a livestock or agriculture, or what percentage of its economy depends on these two things?
That's an excellent question. So Afghanistan, as you know, is a landlocked country. It's a sort of water tower for the whole area. So it has 5 major river basins that flow out of the country. A large percentage of the country is sort of grassland pasture land. So there's something like 50 million livestock that live on Afghanistan. The majority of them rely on rain-fed pasture. And then what happens is that, you know, a lot of the agriculture in Afghanistan is reliant on the rain that falls in the hills that then flows down into the rivers. And so historically there was a little bit more irrigation infrastructure. A lot of that has been underinvested in over the past years. And so the ability of Afghanistan to collect rain, store it, and use it later is much less than some of the other countries around it, which means that from one month to the next, if rain doesn't fall, that can put farmers in very difficult positions.
Is it connected with the global climate change issues in one way or the other, or it's the historic dependence on rain, which is multiplied by what is happening around the globe?
It's both. So historically, Afghanistan has relied on rain. Its agriculture relies on rain, as I was saying, and it's created a system whereby if the rain doesn't fall, as it didn't, last year, that has big impacts on farmers. But it's also connected with the fact that the global climate is changing. The way we produce and use energy is creating this blanket of greenhouse gases around the earth, which is changing where rain falls, how much falls. And in places like Afghanistan, where already the situation is delicate and farmers live very much a kind of hand-to-mouth existence, it makes it much more much more precarious for farmers to survive. So the fact that Afghanistan has had 43 years of conflict, that there's been historical underinvestment in agriculture, in systems to manage irrigation water, means that Afghanistan is much more vulnerable to the kind of changes that climate change is bringing on us.
In this environment in which there's a drought situation and the COVID pandemic and is somewhat of a change of who is running the government, why do you think IMF and World Bank and the United States have decided this is the right time to freeze the money which was flowing towards Afghanistan?
So this isn't my area of expertise. So, I mean, let me just preface that by this is not something that I work on in particular. My understanding of this is that Afghanistan is the new government is on a terrorist watch list, is under UN sanctions. I think roughly half the cabinet have been named in either UN sanctions or under FBI watch lists. And so it's legally not possible for money, as I understand it, and please take this with a pinch of salt, because this is not my area. It's legally not possible for some of this money to be released except for exceptional humanitarian reasons.
$1.1 billion, which are committed to the United Nations. Do you think that's a good enough of money to take care of 18 million people?
So the UN launched what's called a flash appeal to meet the urgent humanitarian needs of, like you're saying, 18 million people who are in imminent food insecurity, who don't have enough to eat. They launched that flash appeal for $600 million. The fact that more than $1 billion, I think, was proposed shows that I think the world community is extremely worried about the situation in Afghanistan. They want to support the humanitarian needs of the Afghan people. We'll have to see what happens with how that money can be used and spent and transmitted to Afghanistan. As I was saying, this is for urgent humanitarian needs. As you'll be aware, with the drought, with the political change, with the fighting, with the conflict that's happened in Afghanistan, the situation is really dire for many, many people. By some estimates, up to more than 90% of people could fall into poverty by the middle of next year. 1/3 of children are facing acute malnutrition, and so the situation is really, really serious. And I think what this is showing is that the world community is keen to ensure that Afghans have enough to eat and can survive, and that's a humanitarian imperative right now.
Let me ask you a question which essentially you raised, and I was interested in the connection there. You said, what does climate change mean for international peace?
That's a very good question. This is what I spend a lot of my time thinking about. My basic answer to that really is that climate change is changing everything. It's happening at a scope and a scale around the world that is really unprecedented in sort of human existence. It's changing where rain falls, where you can grow crops, where the sea comes up, where storms hit, how hard they hit. And you can sort of imagine that just has a big impact on potentially the stability of countries, where people can live, how much food a country can produce for itself. And that has a whole series of knock-on impacts on relationships between countries and relationships also within countries. For example, by some estimates, as many as 200 million people could be displaced from their homes as a result of climate change by the middle of this century. At the moment, we have something like 80 plus million people who've been displaced, more than half by conflict. If you imagine that number more than doubling in the next 30 years, that is a tremendous impact on relationships between and within countries, the impact on where those people go, how they're looked after, what that means for economies. So you can see that quite quickly, an issue like climate change can have really significant impacts, not just in places like Afghanistan, but elsewhere around the world as well.
What are the examples of environmental cooperation on this climate issues, which you think has brought peace to any region? I mean, I know this is not a extraordinary information which will be in the headline of television in the evening news, but Muslim Network is interested in knowing. Are there some examples in which cooperation has spelled into bringing peace to people? Because people seem to be fighting over water.
There's lots of examples of where that's happened. I mean, we all breathe the same air. We all need the same water. We have it. It's in our interests to cooperate over some of these critical issues. And there's examples of where people have come together. They've put politics to one side. They said, look, we need to have clean water. We need to have clean air. We need to have land for crops. Let's collaborate over those. Let's work together over those, so that we can deal with these issues. And hopefully the idea is that you can put politics to one side and you can say, well, look, let's collaborate, let's work together over these issues rather than fighting over them. So let me just give you one example. There's in quite a few places, there have been protected areas that have managed to resolve contested borders. So where people have been fighting or there's been tensions over borders. There's a very famous one between Peru and Ecuador, where there was a contested border and both sides said, right, let's make this into a national park. We won't agree on the final shape of the border, but we will agree that we'll work on this together. And so these things can bring different groups together if they recognize that there's money to be made or their self-interest is in actually working together rather than working against each other.
Well, I hope that continues and those examples grow and people are aware of them because, I'm in Chicago, you being in London. In Chicago, we got Great Lake, we drink that water. And the states around that have a treaty that they will not share that water with the rest of the 40 states in the United States. I mean, that type of cooperation in which you're denying a resource to other people, good for you. But what about the rest of those people who do not have a water reservoir of this size? So I hope that cooperation and collaboration in this field increases as water resources decline. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be with you.
Back to you, Samana.
Thank you, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.